Teachers, what's the darkest thing you've seen from a student? A student during holiday break a few years back murdered her mother and her mother's boyfriend brutally with the help of her own boyfriend. Then the bodies laid in the apartment as she left and eventually went to a New Year's party days later. Eventually she was arrested along with her boyfriend. Chilling to think she was sitting in my classroom days before, probably with this whole plan in her head. Not a teacher, but I worked with students. A student was forced to give oral sex in a vehicle while a screwdriver was held to her neck. When he orgasmed, she made a run for it back to her residence. She had the clarity and ingenuity to keep the semen in her mouth and spit it in a cup for evidence. There was a manhunt and the guy was caught. He was convicted of 3 separate student sexual assaults across the state. I was in the emergency room with the student a couple hours after the incident. Standing there as she described what happened, through her tears and in front of her mother, was one of the hardest things I've ever had to witness. Student would hide in the bushes trying to get near female teacher's feet. Had to advise staff to wear closed-toe sandals, shoes because he was so interested. Discovered he was drawing women with their feet cut off as well as drawing severed feet in high heels. Out of curiosity, how old was this guy? This student turned out to be Quentin Tarantino. Had a student in my class as a sophomore. Every morning her junior year she would come in and chat in the morning. One day out of the blue it stopped. In fact, she wasn't at school at all anymore. Fast forward 3 months, she shows up and looks broken. I ask her what's going on. After quite a bit of hesitation, she tells me that she went to a party and was DD. No alcohol in her system. However, she woke up the next morning and couldn't remember a thing about the previous night. A couple weeks later, she finds out she is pregnant. She was a virgin before that night. Roofied and raped. She had only told her counselor and now me. I haven't had a chance to talk to her due to COVID. Her outlook and demeanor was night and day before and after that party. This breaks my heart. I hope whoever was involved end up in prison. I was student teaching when I was 21. I had a class of high school seniors. One boy was caught telling his friend he planned to rape me in my car. I ended up getting transferred about 2 months into my student teaching experience. I've been assaulted before, so it felt even worse. Edit. I'm really blown away by the kind replies here. Thank you all. I was working at an after-school program as a director, site manager, and one of my employees radioed me needing my immediate assistance at the playground. I raced out there. The employees pulled me aside and said that I needed to look at Lil Billy's back since it was dark outside. She couldn't tell if it was scratch marks or burns. She said she had put in time out, standing against the basketball pole, and he was trying to lean up against it but kept making weird spastic moves every time he leaned against it, so she asked to look at his back after he said it hurt. I asked Lil Billy to follow me to the nurse's office, leaving the door open. The school staff was all gone, but there are cameras everywhere, and just in case, I didn't want anyone thinking I was doing something inappropriate with the kid since I had no idea what I was about to see and or hear. It took everything in my power to not audibly gasp once I lifted the back of his shirt. I counted at least 7 belt loop bruises and 5 lash marks. I asked where he got them from, to which he replied, "My dad. I got a bad grade. This kid got beat with both ends of a belt because he got a P in conduct." I ended up asking his permission to take pictures, and I immediately called CPS. When I showed up to work the next day at 2 p.m., City and the ISD police were there. I found out, from the CPS person, that the woman listed as his mom was the dad's GF and she knew the beatings were going on and that this apparently wasn't the first time. CPS and the city police refused to let the GF or dad see him. Good. Mom lived in a neighboring town, so they removed him immediately and sent him there. That's the last I heard of anything. I'm not a teacher, but I had an off hour in high school and I usually would use it for going home or just hanging out. I was asked by my film photography teacher if I could help with teaching by showing some of my examples and helping mostly 9th graders. I was in 11th grade at the time. I noticed one kid was really quiet and socially awkward, but he had really good prints. And after a couple days I noticed a lot of film was missing, and so I asked my teacher. He said that the quiet kid paid for some extra film to take home and use. I brushed it off for a while until it came to show some of the prints to the class. The quiet kid was third up and I was over near his desk and I noticed some of the pictures he printed. It was two people who turned out to be his mother and father on the floor with what I can assume a large quantity of drugs and alcohol. Most of the photos were of his living situation. It was one of the saddest things I've seen. He was a bright and happy person. I got in contact with him a couple months ago and he's living with his grandparents after his mom and dad got into a fight of money. He now shoots a lot of nature photography. It's good that you reached out and it sounds like, hopefully, his situation has changed for the better. He now shoots a lot of nature photography. Phew. I didn't see it, but I heard it. I used to work at a shelter for at-risk girls aged 8 to 18, mainly truancy or runaway cases, but some were taken from homes of abuse, drugs, sex trafficking, etc. We housed and looked after roughly 20 girls at a time when we were at full capacity. Many of them had a lot of mental and emotional issues. One of our youngest girls at the time, around age 9, was talking to an older girl, around 13. Teen was nonchalantly talking about how she was raped as a young girl before she came to the shelter. Next thing I knew, at least 10 other girls who had overheard the conversation started talking about how old they were when they were raped. Some rattled off multiple ages and times when it occurred. Just causally, it was chilling to hear so many young girls tell their tales. Speaking from experience, it's easier to repeat those stories as a narrator, instead of a participant. Disconnecting emotions during retells helps prevent any flashbacks from feeling the memory versus reciting the memory. Especially for young girls, since they usually have to repeat the stories over and over for the courts or the social workers or the therapists, so it just becomes this deadpan matter-of-fact tone. Still just awful that anyone ever has to go through this shit. Sexual predators that go after children should be put in jail or some kind of group house for life. Unfortunately, mine never even saw the inside of a jail cell. Thank you for your work with these girls at that shelter. I can't imagine that was easy to see, hear, or handle day in and day out, but it's super important work. Not a teacher, but when I was in 5th grade my school had a buddy system. Since I was the oldest out of 7 kids, I grew up learning how to take care of troublesome kids. The buddy system went like this: a 5th grader would be assigned a kindergartner. The two classes met every Wednesday and did arts and crafts together. Since my teacher saw I was strict with kids and knew how to take care and be responsible with kids, I was put with the most problematic kid. This kid misbehaved a lot, and I got him to become a lot better and didn't think much of it until one day this happened. We were helping the kids cut things out, and they gave us big kids real scissors. I had turned around for just a little to ask my classmate what the next step was when I felt a very, very sharp pain on my arm. When I turned around I saw that this little kid had cut me. Not a big cut, but still. I didn't yell, but I asked him why he did that. He then told me that that is what his mom did to him, and that it was just tougher love. It turns out that this kid had been abused and cut by his mother so much he thought that it was love. It was rough. Another story, if at this point you can't tell, my elementary was in a very ghetto area. In 3rd grade one sat next to this very quiet kid. He never talked to me for a few weeks, until one day he said he wanted to kill me. I told my teacher, but the teacher did nothing. No talking to the student, no being benched, nothing. He went from, "I want to kill you," to more detailed threats. "I want to rip you apart, you're so ugly, you should have never been in this world, I hate you," are a few examples. Eventually my teacher did one thing: move me 1 seat away. For some reason the kid kept threatening me. For clarification, I had never met this kid before, never talked to him, never touched him. I did nothing to him. One day, this kid brought broken glass to school and tried to cut me. He was caught and expelled. I never knew why he hated me and still haven't figured it out. My mom was a school nurse and always came home with some crazy stories. One of the most blood-curdling things she has was a girl that was really into cutting to the point where she had a scar that covered the majority of the outside of her bicep. The girl one day decided that she hated her scar and wanted to get rid of it. At home, by herself, she decided she was going to get rid of them. In her bathroom, she took a knife to her arm, cutting a 4 inches by 6 inches piece of scar tissue that was just under an inch thick out of her arm. She then proceeded to stitch it up using a needle and thread and bandage it with gauze all by herself. She then woke up and went to school the next day so she could go to my mom's office and ask if it looked infected. It was. After scrolling through this thread, barely blinking for close to an hour, this shit made me stare into the distance. I am an English teacher and I am the sponsor of the school's comic book and anime club. This year, I managed to take my club to a convention, and many of them had several firsts, such as meeting celebrities, LARPing, participating in panels, speaking to professional artists, and just being with a larger fandom community. Upon our return, one of my members, a 16-year-old girl, asked to speak to me privately. She proceeded to tell me that she had been molested by her father and uncle ever since she was 12. On her 16th birthday, she finally had enough of the abuse and she contacted the police and told them everything. Before the investigation could begin, her uncle committed suicide out of shame. Her father was about to do the same, but she was able to convince him not to do it. He is now facing trial for his crimes. She then thanked me, and said that the 2 days we spent at the convention were the happiest days of her life, and it allowed her to feel like a child for the first time in 4 years. It was the proudest moment of my career. Edit. I want to express a heartfelt thank you for the overwhelmingly positive response to this post. Your kind words will serve to keep me fueled during this time of social distancing. I really miss my students, and I hope I can see them once again before the school year ends. As for the subject of my post, please know that her counselors and I are closely monitoring her as the wheels of justice slowly turn. As long as she's my student, I'll do everything in my power to keep her safe. And maintaining the supportive environment of the comic book and anime club for her to socialize and thrive within and enjoy her high school experience is the best way I can help her now. First paragraph made me forget what was inevitably coming in the second paragraph. Had a kindergartner smash a glass measuring cup and stab himself in the arm to the point that blood was everywhere, all while repeatedly crying, "Please just let me die, I just want to die." Had to sit in my car and cry for about 30 minutes before driving home that day. JFC. Was that child okay in the end? A kindergartner, just, what has he seen? My God! 13-year-old crying hysterically in class, saying random adult voices are telling him to kill himself. Next day has no memory of incident, but tells me it comes in waves. Disturbing. Not my class, but I adopted a rabbit once to keep my other rabbit company. I noticed she didn't have a tail, and when I asked about it I was told she was a kindergarten pet. Apparently the reason she was up for adoption was that one of the children cut off her tail with a pair of fucking safety scissors. She had some issues. Not a teacher, but I did do a lot of volunteer work with little kids. One of the 5th grade boys was caught grabbing random girls and trying to pull them into the supply closet and try to kiss them. He was even caught trying to grab their butts or would out his hand on the seat as they started to sit down. When we finally got to talk to his parents, turned out his grandpa was teaching him these things. The weirdest part was when we questioned the grandpa about it, his response was, "Who cares, they're just little girls. Grandpa's a piece of shit." I was a substitute for a while several years ago. I did the special education classes, mostly, everything from kids who simply had a learning disability to students with severe disabilities such as ASD and behavioral issues. One kid had a very low IQ, and suffered from ADHD. He would come in every day an absolute mess. He was beyond violent and had zero control over his emotions. It's common to see those sorts of issues in some of these kiddos, but we didn't understand why it was this bad. He had medication prescribed and on file to help with some of his issues. Well, come to find out, Mom had been keeping his medication to do only God knows what with. He wasn't getting anything to help with these very real problems. Eventually this kid lost his shit on the teacher's aide in the class and the school had to expel him. One class one was in a lot had mostly kids with ADHD, dyslexia, mild behavioral issues, and I really connected with them. It was a challenge, but I loved them. There was a boy, maybe 10 years old, who would talk to me quite a bit about his father who was in a local rehab program for meth abuse. It was a religious thing that kept people on a campus and had them do church stuff, labor, and volunteer work. Anyway, he would give me updates every few weeks. At the end of the year he comes up and says, "Guess what, Ms. Phoenix_0113. I think my dad is gonna come home. He says he's not gonna do drugs anymore and he's done at rehab. I can't wait for him to come home." He went on about how they were gonna do father-son type things. It was heartbreaking to watch a child deal with a parent in rehab for meth. He was so hopeful and there was a deep love there. I hope sincerely, every time I think of that sweet kid, his dad is healthy and present for his son. My birth mom went to rehab several times during my childhood. She would show up for a while, then abandon me again. I was adopted by my abusive grandparents on her side. We don't know who my dad was, and she would just come into my life every once in a while, wreak havoc, and disappear again completely. I remember always hoping that this time it would work and she'd be clean for good. But even when she was court-ordered to AA and NA meetings, when she had 2 broken legs and a broken collarbone from a drunk driving accident, we would drop her off in front and she would wheel her chair right out the back. She even broke her own collarbone further by pushing on the bones so they would give her more pain meds. Once I thought I had the solution. I told her, earnestly, that I wouldn't speak to her anymore if she did drugs. She promised. Of course she broke that promise, and my dumbass kept speaking to her for many, many years. I even went to the hospital hours away to be with her when she was in the ICU for a spinal infection from shooting up. Her husband couldn't be there because he'd been banned from the hospital after trying to shoot her up in the waiting room. The year after that, after finding out a bunch of stuff about my family, knowing about my sexual abuse and potentially even knowing who my father was and lying to me, I maybe have a half-brother I went to school with briefly. I finally actually cut off my family completely, for good. I didn't realize that blocking their numbers in the phone app just blocks the phone from ringing, and doesn't stop them leaving messages. So I did find out my birth mother died on Christmas the year before last. Then I figured out how to carrier block them, and I haven't heard anything more. I didn't even feel anything when I found out she was dead. I'd already grieved that relationship, over and over again. There was nothing left to feel.